Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako. We're here every week on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute. Today, I'm delighted that we're joined with two of our top-notch team members at the Grassroot Institute in order to talk about policy. You may be interested in exactly what a think tank does. Basically, we do two things. First of all, we research. We take a look at issues that are relevant to the state of Hawaii, and we gather all relevant research from across the world and across the nation in order to bear in on the discussion of those issues. But then in addition to the research, we also take a look at how to influence society at large. Sometimes that's through education of the general public or education of policymakers. Sometimes it's through our work in Washington, D.C., in which we actually go to government leaders and help them in the crafting of policy. Putting these two features together, the research and also the education, is what takes place on a daily basis with our staff who are really strewn across the nation. Many of them are volunteers at universities, professors, attorneys, and others who are helping us to bring research to bear upon issues in Hawaii. And some of them are regular team members. Today I'm delighted that we have with us in studio our Vice President of Research and Development, Joe Kent. Joe has been with us for a little over a year now full-time, but he's spent quite a bit of time developing an expertise on issues that matter for Hawaii. Joe, thanks for being on the program today.
Thanks so much.
I'm looking forward to sharing insights with you. And in a sense, you're going to kind of take us through maybe some of the issues that we've been dealing with recently.
Yes, absolutely. And I also want to say aloha to someone else out there.
Absolutely. We have joining us remotely our policy director from the East Coast at Washington, D.C. Today, she has helped us to gain a national frame of reference on local issues, but she understands the local setting, being from Hawaii, Malia Blom Hill. Malia, welcome aboard.
Hello. Thank you for having me again.
Well, always glad to have you chiming in and working with us on quite a regular basis. Well, Joe, we've had quite a busy term since the end of the legislature. As you know, we were involved in at least 40 items down at the Hawaii State Legislature. We've expanded and gone to counties as well to present our message and so forth. What are some interesting topics that you'd like to talk about today?
Well, I mean, how much time do we have? There was a lot of new topics, I think, that popped up this year in 2015. But I think the biggest ones were traffic issues, and actually number one would probably be homelessness.
Yes.
We've been hearing about this homelessness problem in Hawaii almost every day in the papers, and right now Hawaii does have the highest homelessness population in the United States.
At least on a per capita basis,
right.
We have the highest rate of growth in our homelessness problem. Some of our islands outside of Oahu are experiencing massive growth in homelessness. It's really heartbreaking. You know, Malia, the last time you were here in Hawaii, you could see homeless people and so forth, but in just the last 6 months, some of our homeless populations have tripled in size. One that has grown significantly to several hundred people is right at the doorstep of Honolulu in Kaka'ako, the tent city there. And the situation is much more desperate. You have some perspectives a bit on the homelessness situation overall in the nation and in Hawaii.
Yes, you know, I've understood that Hawaii's homelessness problem is actually getting overwhelming at this point. And I think, you know, this is one of those issues that is so easy to slide off into ideological positions. And I think that's really, from our perspective in Hawaii, very harmful to what we need to do. Because, you know, there's a tendency to either just attack it as though the only problem is finding places to put people, but really we're looking at a situation with a large number of causes that need to be sort of approached in a holistic way, looking at the problem as a whole, so that we're not just looking at homelessness as a way to say, oh, you know, where are we going to put people, but how are we going to solve these underlying problems? How are we going to create a path forward for our state that really addresses the issue?
And you talk about causes, you talk about underlying problems, and what happens to be the case at a think tank is we go searching for those. We don't simply start at the surface level. We don't look around and see the homeless people, although we are moved with great compassion when that we do see them. but we ask the question, what is the inherent and what is the root cause? And so something I'm very pleased with is, Joe, you are heading up a project right now to catalog all the causes of the homelessness situation in Hawaii, not as a final product, but at least as part of our research base, because we have some strong things to say about it. Tell me a little bit about some of the causes.
When most people are policymakers and opinion leaders are asked about why is there homelessness and what's the solution, what a media person is looking for is a one-sentence explanation of how do we fix the problem. But in doing this research, I'm finding there is no one-sentence explanation for how to fix the problem. I mean, save for let's make the economy better, and then how do you do that? The actual solutions for fixing the homelessness problem are very complex, they're in depth, and they sort of take a lot of time to wade through. So there is no, I think, just one blanket solution. One solution that's bubbled to the top of the discussion in Hawaii has been the Housing First initiative. This is something that was tried in Utah and other places across the country. Housing First basically means let's get them a house first, and then after that we'll deal with the next problems down the road, maybe drug use or mental health issues, and et cetera. The thing is, though, a lot of people who are touting the Housing First solution are saying it worked in Utah and therefore it can work in Honolulu. But Utah and Honolulu are very different places. Utah has housing that's 3 times cheaper than in Honolulu. So a solution that was modeled exactly after Utah would have to take that into account. And then to say, oh, how much would the Housing First initiative cost in Honolulu? It could be 3 times as much. And where is the money to pay for that kind of cost? Now, people who are for the Housing First initiative rightly say, well, the Housing First initiative itself saves money, because in Utah, for every person helped by Housing First, they saved $80,000. That was the claim. So you could say that, well, maybe there is some sort of cost-benefit analysis here that we could say it does work. But that research isn't being done right now.
That's right.
And that's what I'm trying to find out. So.
And when it comes to a single tactic, such as the Housing First approach, which basically is to say, let's get people into a stable, safe environment before taking a look at some of the other problems, alcoholism and mental health issues, drug abuse and so forth. Let's not let those things be barriers to get them into that housing, but Housing First. That is a tactic, and it has had positive results all throughout the country at various places, but it's also not worked in different places.
Right.
And so there's nothing wrong with identifying tactics here, but Joe, in your own research, you've come up with an extremely long list of the different kinds of tactics that can be used in dealing with homelessness.
Right.
So one of them, in fact, happens to be promoted by our mayor, which is the sit-lie ban, which would move people off of certain places where they've encamped and so forth. But of course, we all know the other problem with that. A sit-lie ban as a tactic can't work in and of itself because you need other things to be in place.
Exactly.
Same thing with the Housing First. A policy of Housing First won't work by itself. And you could name 10 or 12 other tactics off the top of your head right now.
Right. Well, another tactic could be, let's move them to Sand Island, right? This is something that many people are talking about. Or let's move them to abandoned shopping centers, things like that. Another is to just let's pay nonprofits who are already working on the problem to take care of the problem themselves.
That's right.
And also there's private free market approaches as well.
Well, and this is where we want to make a contribution. First of all, let me say this. For those people who are involved in various of the different strategies and tactics to alleviate the problem of homelessness, keep going. I mean, that's important work done by charities, done by churches, done by state agencies, done by people who care about the homeless, who are serving the homeless and meeting their needs. And we support that. That is an on-the-ground level of support. Where we come in to the discussion is to say, in addition to that on-the-ground level of support for the homeless, on-the-ground intervention, we need to do something on a macro level in our state. We need to do something that is so big that it changes the economic condition of the state of Hawaii, that in the process, we see the problem of homelessness alleviated by the booming economy. Now, that's a different way of talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, whenever you talk about a solution to homelessness, be it Housing First or a private nonprofit or et cetera, every single one of those approaches has a consequence to it.
That's right.
So, for example, let's give people a free house, for example, might have an unintended consequence of people becoming homeless so that they can have a free house.
That's right.
Or let's give people welfare might create dependency on the welfare itself.
That's right.
So we always have to recognize the costs to these things. But when you think about the big picture, about the actual causes of the symptoms, those are the real things that could actually solve the problem.
That's right.
So.
And that's what we're focusing on. While we're looking at the different strategic and tactical things that can be done on the ground to help the poor and the homeless, which need to be done, we're also looking at those kinds of things at a macro level that can work. Let me give you just a handful of some of them that would really be very fruitful. Number one, increase the amount of land that is available for development in the state. Very few people know that we develop urbanization on less than 2.5% of all the land in the state. It will not hurt us. The experts tell us to increase by 0.5% more, and so forth. It's not going to hurt the environment. But what it could do is reduce the scarcity of land, and some of that can be used to meet the needs of affordable housing and so forth. That's a policy change at the macro level.
Right.
We also know that, for example, a second one, if we were to alleviate the requirements of the minimum wage law,
right,
which will soon require owners of businesses to pay $15 or more, plus the insurances and everything else they pay.
Right.
People who are in some of the homeless camps that would work for $5 or something in the short run could benefit from that. Now, rather than go through all of the different prescriptions, we have discovered that by looking across the world, there are certain policies at the macro level for the economy that actually boost the economy in such a way that there is greater investment, there's greater philanthropy, there's greater opportunity, there's less business restriction on people being able to rise up from the bottom levels. And that's pretty much what we mean by free market approaches.
I've done some research on this and looking just generally at we're in areas where there is the least amount of government interference in the economy. Those are the same places that we've seen the least amount of homelessness.
That's right. Malia, before we go quickly to a break, any thoughts that you have on the correct approach to coming up with solutions for homelessness?
Well, I think it's important to remember that what we're looking at essentially is the people who, we've talked about the cost of living in Hawaii, the high cost of living, the affordable housing crisis. And what we're seeing is the failure of the safety net to catch those people at the bottom, contributing to the homelessness problem. So when we attack, cost of living, things like the Jones Act, economic recommendations, affordable housing, we're not just looking at how to improve the economy of Hawaii, how to help the middle class. We're looking at the people, the way that improving the economy all the way top to bottom will help recreate that safety net that will catch those people who have now fallen into homelessness.
Very good, thank you. We'll be back with more policy talk from the Grassroot Institute on ThinkTech Hawaii's broadcast network shortly after this quick break. Don't go away.
Here's the deal. I'm Jay Fidel. I'm the host of Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, which is the Energy Policy Forum's program on Wednesday. That's how we call Wednesday Energy Wednesday. We call it Energy Wednesday every Wednesday. Are you surprised? Okay, and we try to get guys like Jim Alberts here from Hawaiian Electric who can tell us what's really going on in energy. We want to be informed. It's so important. It's the most important initiative in our state. Clean energy is major, okay? And that's why we cover it on this show. That's the deal. What do you think, Sharon?
I think that's great. That's why we're here every Wednesday from 4 to 5, and we hope you all join us so we can hear people like Jim coming on our show and co-host Ray Starling from Hawaii Energy.
Okay, Jim, you've been here today. You've seen this. You heard what she said. What do you think?
I think it's a tremendous opportunity for people to come together and talk about the issues. Oftentimes there isn't a good forum to bring these key issues out into the public, and this is a tremendous way to go about it. And the activity of this show is essential to keep talking about energy, because as you said, it's such an essential part of our lives that we need to pay attention to it, and we need to think about the future.
Okay, Ray, your turn.
Well, this is a special time in the history of Hawaii where we're making some pretty radical changes in the way we use energy and generate energy. And this show is the one place you can count on coming to every Wednesday and hearing
Groups of homeless.
Welcome back, everybody. We're E Hana Kako here every week on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. E Hana Kako, that sounds like a venerable Hawaiian saying, E Pule Kako, which means let's pray together. At the Grassroot Institute, we invite everyone to E Hana Kako. Let's work together. Let's work together for a better economy, government, and society. And that's what we're talking about today with some of our team members who do research at the Grassroot Institute. Malia Blom Hill, who is with us by Skype from Washington, D.C., and Joe Kent, our VP for Research and Development here in Honolulu. Joe, you were taking us through a handful of issues that we were discussing, primarily about how we approach the whole issue of homelessness.
Right. Well, I became really passionate in this issue when I saw many of my friends who had jobs and had apartments start to say, you know, it would actually, you know, my rent is raising, and it's actually easier for me to just live in a tent on the beach and still work. And so now my friends were becoming the working homeless. And so I became really passionate about this issue and trying to figure out ways to solve the problem. Now, we've mentioned free market solutions to homelessness sort of as a quick aside, but can you talk a little bit more about what we mean about the free market solutions?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I'd like to ask Malia to chime in here a bit on that. We talk about a basic difference, Malia, between a society and economy in which government is pretty much in control of everything. In the extreme case, that might be such as in a communist state, as in the Soviet Union before the fall of the Soviet Union, or in North Korea. Those are the extremes. As opposed to a free market, where we let the players in the free market, the people who have the money, the businesses and so forth, make the decisions and so forth. So the question I'd like to ask you is, how does the free market work better in the end for meeting the needs of all people, including the poor in society?
Well, you know, it's partly a philosophical answer and partly a practical answer. You know, President Reagan used to say that the scariest words you could say in the English language were, "I'm from the government." Just sort of acknowledging that government, when it moves to help people, is inefficient. It tends to be wasteful. It tends to ignore the situations before it in favor of a one-size-fits-all effort. Free market approaches to social problems do allow for people to move in their best interest. And it is in our interest, in our state, in our economic interest, to attack the homelessness problem, to solve this problem. It is harmful to tourism. You know, there's just the plain old compassionate argument for it. But we want to find a solution, and we want to find one that people want to do willingly, that doesn't need to be pulled out of them by the government, but is in the interests of those finding the solutions and the interests of those who are homeless, because that's the best chance for success when people are acting in their self-interest. And that's the philosophical reasoning behind free market approaches, which is that you can trust people to act in their self-interest, and working in that way, we can, you know, to paraphrase Adam Smith, working in our self-interest actually benefits us.
That's right. And some of the research actually bears this out. Stephen Moore has written a book called Who's the Fairest of Them All? And the reason I like that title is because it deals with something people care about today. They care about fairness. Whether you have analyzed the difference between income of the wealthy and the poor, there's a general feeling amongst people that it'd be nicer if the poor were closer to the rich and the rich were closer to the poor. And there are real problems with thinking that way. But there's an emotion about that. So the name of the book is Who's the Fairest of Them All, because Stephen went out and he looked for societies in which there was a more even distribution of goods and of wealth. And guess what he discovered by analyzing virtually every economic system on the planet? The economic systems in which you had strong levels of centralized government control and had very low amounts of the free market produced the greatest disparity between the rich and the poor. You had the hugest gap. So you'd have the most unfairness in systems that had great central government control, even when they had centralized government welfare for health and for education and other things.
So fairness doesn't automatically lead to prosperity?
That's right. On the other hand, what he discovered is that where you had the least amount of government control and the least amount of engagement of government in welfare itself, providing for the needs of the poor, you had the greatest parity of income between the rich and the poor. You had the greatest amount of prosperity across the board. And the research is in that shows that this is the case, so we need to ask, why is this the case? When we're talking about a free market economy, we're talking about an economy where, number one, people can count on the rule of law, that property rights are respected, and property is something that people own in a widespread way, so that you have a great number of people building generational wealth through property ownership. Secondly, businesses and individuals are allowed to transact with each other with an absolute minimal amount of government interference, so that the government is not determining the price of something, or the supply of something, or the demand of something, but natural market forces work. And third, you have natural market forces and the incentives of people solving the problems of the poor. Let me give you a very tiny example. In Waikiki, getting homeless people off of hotel property has been a major problem until some hotels figured this out. It was in their interest to pay charities such as Institute for Human Services to deal with the needs of the homeless in a serious and sustainable way, and lo and behold, they're off their property. But that's an economic equation there that works on the basis of incentive. So all of these approaches are free market approaches, and the bottom line of the research is that where we don't have the free market at work, you have the greatest disparity between the rich and the poor.
You know, I also thought about that, and what Malia mentioned is that government, by its very nature, cannot distinguish between groups of people. And I did some research about solutions to homelessness in America's history. And it turns out that many years ago, we did have many private solutions to homelessness across America. In fact, most of the time, that was all we had, was private solutions to homelessness and poverty. Things such as mutual aid societies popped up, and they had a real interest in figuring out who needed what kind of service. And that's something that governments, I think, have a real problem with, of deciding how much money should go to which group, because it kind of sees everybody as everybody. And so so the money goes to some people who create a dependency around. And so I see that too here in Honolulu when I was just walking past the Bishop Park here in downtown Honolulu, and which is a private park. And it's miraculous. I mean, it looks like a really nice park to go to. Then you go to public parks and they don't look so nice, I'm sorry to say. And that's just one example of sort of the difference between a private and a public approach. So not to say that all private approaches are the solution here, but I just think it's kind of interesting, that distinction. So,
Malia, what are some of the ways in which the free market gives incentives to solve or present solutions to homelessness and other needs in society?
Well, it's kind of interesting how it works because, libertarians, us free market types, we're always seen as, lacking compassion compared to, people who just want to go out and solve this problem. This talk about free market is seen as not compassionate, but what it really is understanding human nature and understanding that you don't need the government to create compassion. That you can have an interest without the hand of the government coming in, an interest among private charities, among private philanthropists, in helping and addressing these problems, these social problems, in a way that is a lot more personal, a lot more tuned into the culture than a government agency can ever hope to be. You have businesses, like your example at Waikiki, that have a specific interest in maintaining, maintaining a certain appearance of Hawaii, in, solving social problems that could impact their bottom line. And, we have to be realistic. Things like homelessness do impact tourism and the bottom line, but we have to take advantage of that fact and that knowledge and bring these groups together and say, it is in your interest to take a look at mental health issues. It is in your interest to take a look at creating affordable housing. And then we have to take a look at who does it and who can do it efficiently, economically, and without necessarily requiring the hand of government to not only take money out of people's pockets to solve the problem, but also to force, because let's not forget, when we're talking about homeless, we are talking about people who need to be asked to do something. And we're, in a sense, we're just talking about them as this big mass, like, well, they'll just do what the government tells them to do because we need to not have this problem anymore. That's not a passionate approach. So there's also the question of what is in the interest of the homeless. How can we work all these interests together in a way that doesn't require the hand of government to force people to give money, to act in a certain way?
And also, it's important also to recognize that solutions to poverty and homelessness, just because we have good intentions, doesn't necessarily mean that it leads to good effects.
Sure.
And so that's what we're trying to do here at the Grassroot Institute, is to try to see which policies, whether good intentions or not, actually have good effects in solving the problem.
I think as we go to a break now, one of the things to keep in mind is that the issue is really not between government or no government at all. We do live in a world in which we have come together through the Constitution of the United States to have a government. So the key thing, as we like to say, is to make sure that government is limited to its purpose and accountable. And when it comes to systems that reach out to the poor, it's important not to create incentives to work against working or to work against the private sector playing its role. We'll be back right after this quick break. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroot Institute. You're watching E Hana Kako on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network.
Aloha, my name is Jim Sean, and I'm host of a show called Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. Each week, live streaming at noon on ThinkTech Hawaii, we interview people who have special insights into education, from early education through K-12, all the way through higher education and beyond. Both public and private are areas we're interested in. We dig deeper. We try to find out what it's really like to be involved in making change, advocating for it, how you reform, what people's philosophies are in reforming it. As I said, we're live streaming every Wednesday at noon on ThinkTech Hawaii. And later on, you can find these interviews on YouTube and on the Hawaii Educational Policy Center website. We hope you join us as many times as possible. Aloha.
Welcome back to E Hana Kako, here every week on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm so proud to be part of ThinkTech Hawaii. Such a great group of people working hard to bring public issues to a broader audience. We thank Jay Fidel, producer, and all of the team members for the 35 hours that they produce every week in live content from Honolulu, mostly, or from other parts of the world from time to time. My guests today are members of the Grassroot Institute, Joe Kent, VP for Research and Development, and Malia Hill, with us from Washington, D.C., our Policy Director. Joe, I think it's time to go to the Twitter and see if there are some tweets that have come in.
Yeah, thank you again for tweeting us at ThinkTech And we have a tweet from someone who says, free market economy philosophy does not take greed into account. Corporate abuse runs rampant with regulation. So less regulation? No. So what do you think about that, Dr. Akina? If we have a free market approach, then the free market corporations will just become greedy, and that's not going to solve the homelessness problem.
Well, you know, that's a great observation, and it speaks to an ongoing issue that is discussed when free market economics is talked about. And I want to say thanks to Mr. Mark Ward, who has tweeted in and asked anyone else to go ahead and contact us with questions or comments. Here's the bottom line. Corporate America can be terribly, terribly, terribly corrupt. There's no doubt about that. It's been proven to be corruptible. But the other bottom line has to be weighed in also, and that is government can be terribly, terribly, terribly corrupt. See, human beings are the same whether they're in government or in private business. But the only problem with being in government is that the level of power and control that are available can be absolutely pervasive and can trump the corporate world altogether. We have no fantasies at the Grassroot Institute. We're not thinking those are really nice, polite people in the corporate world and really bad, evil people in government. We think everybody's capable of being bad and evil. And should therefore be given the best incentives for serving the greater good. Adam Smith struggled with this issue, and he developed the concept of the invisible hand. In other words, what is the invisible part of our economic system that brings out the right outcomes? And it so happens that it works like this. You are evil and I am evil, potentially, both of us. We have a piece of cake over here. How best do we divide it? Do we have a council of government tell us how much cake you get and how much cake I get? Or do we create an incentive whereby the one of us, one gets to cut it and the other one gets to choose? What's going to happen if one of us cuts it and the other chooses? We're both going to work to do what?
Work together to get our share of the cake, I
That's
guess,
a free market solution.
Okay.
And so thanks, Mark, for your comment. I would say we're looking for solutions that provide the best incentives, and that's what we mean by free market.
I think it's a good idea to challenge that, and also we need to challenge our own ideas about all the solutions out there that that we want to help people.
Right.
Because as I said before, just because you have a good intention doesn't mean that it leads to a good effect.
And I'm glad Mark asked that question, because a lot of times people think that those who promote the free market are saying that corporate leaders are better people than government leaders. The issue is not about who's better in their character. The issue is always about what system best incentivizes the common good.
Right, and speaking of systems, along with this issue that has popped up in the news, another issue that's related, the hospital issue, has been very big in the news right now. The Maui Hospital has been a public hospital for many years, and it is collapsing right now financially and in many other ways, actually. And what the hospital has found, though, is that a private partnership may be the right way to save the hospital system. So Governor Ige is looking at this model, and many people are looking at this model as a solution. What do you think about this solution, Dr. Akina?
Well, I'm very pleased and delighted with some legislation that took place in this last legislative session here in 2015 in the state of Hawaii, and the bill that was produced that Governor Ige signed, which allows Maui Hospital system, the 3 hospitals there belonging to the state, to privatize their labor contract. That's a wonderful thing to do, because they were spending up to 70% of their revenues on labor. It was just not sustainable from a business point of view. And the great thing is that they're now able to select a partner that can run the hospital well, manage the labor well, and they'll be able to hire back virtually everybody who was working under the government labor contract. Malia, what are some of the benefits you see in this privatization move?
Well, you know, we don't need any more examples of how Maui Hospital can fail. We have pretty much experienced or seen that as bad as it can. So, I mean, part of the frustration in watching this has come from an effort to block what, you know, from the citizens of Maui is just a desperate attempt to do something to stop this just cavalcade of failure that they've experienced in something that is an absolute necessity. So in terms of what we can hope from it, I think the single biggest hope we have is that this is a system that will provide the necessary care to the citizens of Maui and do so in a way that is economically efficient. you know, one doesn't like to throw economically efficient when we're talking about healthcare because it sounds a little ration-y. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, we, in addition to all the various social crises that Hawaii has been facing lately, we're looking at a widespread problem in our hospital system. And if this is the way forward, that is a really excellent opportunity, not just in Maui, but throughout all the islands.
That's right.
So I'm really hoping that this works out the way that we've seen it work on the mainland.
You know, Joe, one of the things I like about this example of the privatization of labor at Maui Hospital is that it addresses that misconception about free market solutions. You see, it's not that the union leaders are bad leaders or bad people. It's not that the potential private leaders of hospitals, such as either Kaiser or Hawaii Pacific Health or someone else, are good, or that they're evil and the union people are good. It has nothing to do with the goodness or badness of the players. It has to do with incentives. Right now, under union control, the major incentive is to maintain control over the number of jobs. And that's how the union leaders are evaluated, the number of jobs that they control. On the other hand, for the business people who are coming in and may be able to bid now for the contract, their incentive is make money. It so happens if that hospital makes money, the state benefits and doesn't shut down the hospital, and the poor benefit because the clinics are not shut down.
Right.
So it's
right, but I want to go back to the gentleman who was tweeting us. He was saying that if we have, well, actually, he just tweeted us again. This is Mr. Mark Ward. Thank you again for your tweets. It's at ThinkTech HI, and he's saying the cake analogy fails to, remember the cake analogy we talked about before, it fails to account for power. So when one has wealth or access and the other doesn't, if he wants to eat the cake, then he'll take it. So what about that? Now we've got a Maui, maybe a private Maui hospital, and he's going to take the cake because he wants to make a profit. So he might take medical access or medical care from those that need it because he wants to make a profit.
Well, I appreciate that comment, but the power is the same thing as the money or anything else involved in here. People will grant you this. People, whether they're in business or in government, are vulnerable to the desire for power. They're vulnerable to the desire for money. What we're talking about is creating an incentive system. So the only illustration I was trying to bring out here is that when we create competitive parties around the outcome, that is to say, you're competing for a bigger piece of pie than I'm competing for, that incentivizes getting a certain result. On the other hand, when it comes to government control over that decision, that's precisely where power can take over, because the outcome is based upon who holds the power to make the decision.
Right, and also there's empirical proof as well. These kinds of privatization partnership efforts have led to 10% to 25% cost savings across the country where this has happened, like in Louisiana. The hospitals in Louisiana have very much been partnered with private entities, 9 hospitals, and they've all experienced these kinds of 10 to 25% cost savings, as well as quality improvements.
That's right. On a very, very basic level, our state government has shown that it has been incapable of running a going business out of the hospital system. Maui hospital system alone would have to pay $80 million just to stay in business, and that would be money from the taxpayers for this year. Being able to get into a situation where they become, in the long run, profitable is good for everybody, and it keeps the clinics from being closed for the poor.
Right. So that it actually does relate to the homelessness issue
right.
and the poverty issue, because we could talk about mental health facilities, we could talk about
That's right.
access for people who need it.
This is a great example of how a policy issue about the way we run things in the state affects the poor. Because one of the things that happened recently in the closure of one of our neighbor island psychiatric clinics that belongs to the state hospital system is that several of the people who are being treated there are back on the streets without mental health care. And that's something that absolutely raises the number of homeless people in our state.
That's right. And in addition to that, there are many facilities in mental health that are being used by people who don't have the mental health problems that maybe are required. So in other words, people who are, should I say, faking it to get the access in the system. Those people are using up beds that people who really need those facilities could use. So
You used an interesting phrase here, and that is faking it. Actually, personally, and from a free market point of view, it's not all that important to know whether people are faking it.
that's a good point. Yeah.
Because that involves a character judgment. And you know, there are times I'm faking it too. And still somebody pays my salary. What we really are concerned about in free markets is lining up incentives so they work for the greater good. So for example, if we have a welfare system that pays someone more in order not to work, and because she or he loses benefits once they work, that works against their own personal development and the greater good of everybody. So let's not create those kinds of disincentive situations.
Right.
That's what the free market is all about.
Exactly.
Malia, I see you there thinking through this.
You know, I think I have to return to the cake analogy. Maybe it's because I'm a parent. And, you know, dispute the cake analogy however you want, but if you've ever had to make two children split a piece of cake, you know that it works. It works because of competition and incentives. You know, no one's denying that, you know, people can be greedy, that people can be corrupt. The problem really is about government power and government incentives versus private power and private incentives. And one of the things, you know, we talk about this in the hospital system, we talk about this in education, we talk about it in a wide variety of contexts, is that this idea of competition where the incentive works in the to the benefit of the people is really what we're trying to create. So we're trying to create a situation where there is a sense of competition where the winner is the one that gives the best health care to the people of Maui. That's really all that we're going for here. And, you know, with the cake, it's just that sense of competition where the winner is the one who, okay, well, I guess we just have to split it half and half. Because that's the only way to make sure that you get as much as you can. It's really more about that, you know, without denying, you know, corruption or greed, which are serious problems that need to be dealt with. You can't also say, well, then the answer is that, you know, we'll just clamp down with regulation on everything, because we've seen that a government-run healthcare system, at least in the case of Maui, has been a problem.
Thank you, Malia, for those comments. Well, that brings us to the end of our policy talk today. I want to thank you very much, Joe, for all your hard work, and Malia as well. This is a great place to remind our viewers that they can access all the research that we do, or most of it at least, online at grassrootinstitute.org. That's grassroot singular, grassrootinstitute.org. And we look forward to seeing you next week on Ehana Kako. Let's work together on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Until then, aloha.